right? One of the reasons that I'm very pessimistic about these kinds of things. You get a lot of people that claim a lot of things, and there are two things that are very interesting about the Hale Bopp thing. One is that when Hale Bopp was going on, of course, I could see it in the sky. I was listening to it on radio shows. I was part of the, watching and waiting and seeing what would happen and whatever. And there was a guy named Courtney Brown, and Courtney Brown came on and said, well, you know what, there's a UFO that's following it. I talked to an astronomer, and he says that it's there, blah, blah, blah. And everybody's lit up. Oh, my God, there's a UFO behind Hale Bopp. That's where this whole thing with Heaven's Gate comes from, right? And Whitley Strieber goes on a radio show, and it says, oh, yes, I know who this astronomer is. I heard this with my own ears. I know who the astronomer is. It's legit. They have photos, yada, 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 right? Then Heaven's Gate happens, and then they all back away from it, and they sell Courtney Brown down the river. But, Whitley Strieber went on there and said, hey, I know who this guy is too, but we don't talk about that, right? The other thing that happened on Hale Bopp was I remember it vividly because I was driving back. I was in the college at the time, and I was driving back to college because my family didn't live that far. They lived about an hour away. And so I was driving home from visiting my parents, and there's a stretch of road that is very different now, but when I was in college, there was a stretch of road, a freeway, and there were very few lights. And it was in the middle of nowhere, and there are houses there now, but it was in the middle of nowhere. There's no lights. It's in the middle of the night. It's like 12:30 in the morning. Hale Bopp's in the sky. I'm listening to Art Bell, and Ed Dames comes on and says, oh, yeah, I remote viewed it. I'm Dr. Doom.
Yeah.
There's a pod on the back of Hale Bopp that's going to detach and come down and kill all the plant life on the earth. Well, as I sit in my backyard right now, I'm looking at my trees. I got a whole bunch of flowers and plants sitting in front of me. I got a bunch of trees. I got a power line, but, oh well. And it's all still here. There's, no pod detached. He was wrong. The kill shot never happened. None of these things ever happened.
No,
but it scared the crap out of everybody.
Yeah, that's, I know for a fact. I knew somebody back in that time frame when he was talking about places to move. They turned around, sold their house, they sold everything they had, okay, and moved out of the country, thinking, oh God, that's the only way they're going to live. They took a bath on everything they owned to get rid of it because they did it as fast as they humanly could do it, and then nothing ever happened. I'm not saying we won't get a kill shot,
disclosure.
But people,
but you don't know when it's coming. And that's disclosure right then and right there. That's the whole problem. So we talk about it, but it never comes. And in my lifetime as a UFO person, UFO researcher, and conspiracy researcher, and everything else, in my lifetime of being active doing that stuff since 95, right? It's 24 years that I've been kind of researching. I started researching this stuff when I was 8, but as an adult looking into this stuff, it's a good 25 years. Okay. For 25 years, people have been telling me that disclosure is coming, and I've seen a lot of progress. And in my 25 years, I've seen a lot of weird stuff. I've seen the Lazar Sportster model hovering in the sky. I've gone to ECETI. I've seen weird things in the sky. I've seen the Aurora twice. Right? I've watched a UFO dogfight. I've seen things with my monocular. Right? I've done all these things. Okay? But disclosure is still not here. And they've been talking. There was a time, I think, in the 90s when I think we came very close. But it all got blown up, and I just don't see it. But I think there was a point in the 90s where we got very, very, very close.
Well,
But after that, I just...
Well, too, you have to remember some of the presidents, like Jimmy Carter. That's one of the things he was going to do when he came in office was disclosure on UFOs.
Bill Clinton, right?
Yeah, Bill Clinton and his wife. That's one thing they promised when he was running for president. But when they get in, all of a sudden they don't talk about it, probably because they are told basically to shut up about it. And, I just remember, like, one of the stories I remember on Art Bell show that somebody went up, I guess, on an airplane flight. Jimmy Carter was on it. And they went up to Jimmy Carter and said, what's this bit about UFOs? And Jimmy Carter, I guess, turned bright red for a second and said, I can't talk about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a very famous story about Bill Clinton that I forget who he dispatched to the DOD, but he said, I want everything you've got on Roswell. And they were like, you don't have the clearance. They just shut it right down. I mean, Leon Panetta tried, and they told him he was the head of the CIA, and they're like, no.
Yeah.
So, these, fairly powerful, I mean, there are some presidents that I think were knowledgeable about whatever the situation is, like the famous story about Nixon, or like a Ronald Reagan, but
well, now I gotta jump into something. Now, yeah, I don't know if I ever told you this, and I've talked about it on my show. My dad, during the Korean War, when he was getting ready to be discharged, and he was in Korea, he got to meet a guy named James Gardner, which actually was Gardner at the, was a bum, whatever his last name was. I didn't, when I was a little kid, every summer, my dad's friend would come up from California and visit my dad for about a week. Well, when I got older, I realized who he was. And, at one point I was talking to him and I said, I really would like to talk to, if there's any way you could ever connect me with Ronald Reagan when he was president. And, he goes, well, I'll see what I can do. And, at that point, Reagan used to do a show once a month for young people, could call up and talk to the president and ask him a question. Well, I got a phone call from Ronald Reagan. And, I mean, I was really ecstatic. But the good thing is, because of him being a friend of my dad's friend, I got to talk to the president a couple times, off the air. He would actually, Reagan actually called me and I called him. I had a number. I could get a hold of him through the White House at the time. And, we would talk about all kinds of things, like what it was like when he was governor, making movies and stuff like that. But I mentioned to him about, these killer satellites making a thing around the Earth to protect the Earth and all this stuff. And, I said, that would that protect us against, Russia or anything, and he goes, well, I know it'll protect us against them. And he did not imply Russia. He was talking about, Star Wars. He was talking about something out there. And, I didn't really think much of it because I was young. But then a few years after that, all of a sudden it kind of like sunk in my head what he actually said.
On you. Yeah. Well, I had an interesting conversation with a guy once. I'm very upfront that I don't do whistleblowers, and I don't want to go to prison, so don't send me classified information, right? But I was talking to a guy that I knew once, and he had been in the Soviet Air Force, and he was stationed at a couple of different facilities in relation to their kind of launch program for spaceships and stuff and rockets. He was part of the missile program, the rocket program, whatever. And I asked him once, I said, so tell me something. He goes, okay. I said, the whole Star Wars thing, what's the deal, right? Because there's always been an argument of, well, did they actually put it up there or not? And he said, well, I'll tell you this. He said, as an officer in the Soviet Air Force, I was aware that it's up there, that they put it up there. It's there. And he said, I will also tell you this, that everything that you guys put up there, we put up there too.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff floating around up there that was launched by the Soviets and by us to do something, right?
Yeah.
And, he said, I don't know what they were trying to shoot down or blow up or whatever, but this stuff is indeed up there. And it's there for some reason, right? And he didn't know. That was beyond his knowledge. But he said that Star Wars he knew for a fact that Star Wars was active. And for both the Soviets, now Russians, and us. And, you watch things like STS-48, And it really makes you wonder, because you watch the light come in from space, comes in, gets up to the, toward the Earth. There's a flash. It turns around and leaves. And as it's leaving, you watch projectiles being fired at it. And it makes you wonder what launched those projectiles, right?
Well, I would wonder, yes.
I don't have a problem. Yeah, I suspect that everything that Reagan told you is pretty upfront and true.
Well, he didn't actually say what it was, but he implied there was something there, and it was not for to protect us against Russia. So that I sit back and then I realize what he was saying in a roundabout way. But I'm sure it's so much more advanced than what it was even then to protect our planet.
Sure. Well, and the other thing that you have to realize, right, is that nowadays, we can download apps on our phones, or, for a long time I had a screensaver. They would actually show you the positions of satellites on your screen as a screensaver. And you could select military, and it would show you all the military satellites. You don't necessarily know what all those military satellites are doing. You just know they're military, right? But, the truth is we really don't know what a lot of that stuff does. We just know what we're told. And the classic example of is, hey, Gary, do you like using GPS? Does it help you out?
Yeah, most of the time, yeah.
Okay. Do you know that the GPS satellite constellation is owned by the Air Force, right?
Well, I know it was military, that originally, yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, do you know what its actual purpose was?
No, but why don't you go ahead and tell the listeners?
They have flash detectors. So all those GPS satellites, they had a dual purpose. One was to give the military at the time very precise pinpoint, mapping, so that they could figure out exactly where they were. The same way you put in Waze or Google Maps or whatever on your phone to go visit or to figure out where the closest Safeway is. They wanted the same thing with a tank brigade, to be able to say, okay, well, I want to go over here. The second thing that those satellites had on them was something called a flash detector. What that does is that if there's a nuclear detonation anywhere on the Earth, these satellites will see it. From the photo that they take when the flash occurs, they can tell how big it was, where it was manufactured, where it happened, what kind of fissible material was used. All that they can tell from the flash detector device, right? So there's a very famous story that there was a nuclear test carried out by South Africa. And to this day, South Africa denies that they have a nuclear weapon at all. And they deny that they had a nuclear test. But when they detonated the nuclear weapon, the flash detectors on the GPS constellation saw it. They were able to determine the source of the plutonium that was used in the device. And that's a GPS satellite. So, the idea that, okay, well, you have something that we think is a surveillance satellite, but in reality it's Brilliant Pebbles, which was a Star Wars thing where it would fire like a pod, and that pod would explode, and it would fire these like bearings. They were like marble, maybe larger size bearings toward an object, and it would create like a cloud of these bearings, right? And then the bearings would contact whatever the target was and would literally rip it apart because of the velocity. Well, you could have something that you think is a surveillance satellite until it turns around and it fires one of these pods. So we really don't know what a lot of that stuff up there is for, right? And it may actually have a dual purpose. It may be taking satellite photos, but it may also have a laser on it. We have no idea.
Yeah, we don't even know.
And I think it's a very good point. I would argue to you that it is absolutely for shooting something coming at us. Now, whether that's an asteroid or whether that's an alien or whether, it's something a little stranger, which is what I contend, whatever it is, it's something that we don't want. And we've got the firepower up there between us and the Russians and the Chinese and everybody else. I think they're all in cahoots with each other. And I think that this stuff is a defense grid. I've believed that for a very long time. But I think that that a lot of these things, these tensions and these things that we feel with the larger superpowers,